There are moments when the offseason stops feeling like a tune-up and starts sounding like an ultimatum. And that is exactly what the Chargers are living through right now. Because this is not just about fixing a few details anymore, and it is not about hoping raw talent can keep covering everything up. This is about deciding whether this offense is finally going to get the foundation it needs to protect its quarterback, support the physical style this team wants to impose, and turn promise into a real AFC threat. The pressure here is not overreaction, it is reading the room. Today we are connecting all the signals, breaking down why this stretch matters so much, and looking at which paths actually make sense from here. So hit that like button and stay with me to the end, because this could shake up the entire ceiling of the Chargers in 2026. The first major problem in this whole story is staring everybody right in the face, and there is no point sugarcoating it. The Chargers' offensive line became way too big of an issue for a team that says it is thinking big. When a unit is ranked near the bottom of the league because of brutal injuries on the edges, shaky play inside, and a constant feeling of instability, that does not stay on paper. It bleeds into the identity of the entire offense. It affects protection, rhythm, confidence, and even the kind of plays this team feels comfortable calling. And the hardest part is this is not some tiny correction. The middle of that line basically got blown apart. You had a retirement, you had key departures, you had a swing that did not work out and ended with a release. So what looked like a normal offseason fix suddenly became close to an internal rebuild. And when that happens on a roster that wants to compete right now, the conversation stops being, "It would be nice to add help," and becomes, "How far can this team really go if it does not solve this immediately?" That is why the name Olaivavega Ioane keeps showing up so strongly in the draft conversation. And honestly, it is easy to see why. The read is pretty simple. If the goal is to bring back power, stability in the run game, and more security in the middle of the pocket, this profile fits exactly what the Chargers need. Everything about him screams pure guard, heavy, strong, built to move people. The kind of player who could step in and immediately raise the floor for a line that lost way too much stability. Now there is an important detail here. This is not one of those prospects being sold as some magic, perfect, no questions asked answer. There are concerns. There is real debate about his lateral quickness, about how he handles twitchy interior defenders, about scheme dependence. And honestly, that makes the conversation even more serious to me, because it shows this is not blind hype. The case for the Chargers here is not fantasy. It is fit. It is a real need colliding with a player who could start early, hold his ground, and give structure back to an offense that cannot keep living off improvisation. When different analysts and even coaches who went up against him keep repeating that he looks like an early starter, that says a lot. Not because it erases all the risk, but because it reveals a direction, and that direction matters. If the Chargers truly understand the size of the hole that opened up in the trenches, then this kind of pick stops looking conservative and starts looking urgent. Because before this team can dream about its ceiling, it has to rebuild its floor. And then comes the second story. And this is where the whole tone of the conversation changes. Because if the first one points to the floor of the offense, this one points to the ceiling. And the name tied to this possibility does that instantly. Deebo Samuel would not just be another piece. He would be a statement, a loud one. The kind of move that tells the league the Chargers do not just want to be more organized on offense. They want to be more dangerous, more unpredictable, and way harder to defend when the lights get hot. The fit jumps off the screen because it changes the personality of the unit. This is not just a traditional receiver conversation. This is a player who breaks tackles, creates yards after the catch, moves all over the formation, and forces a defense to rewrite its game plan on the fly. And that matters in a huge way, because there is a real feeling that the Chargers still need more violence with the ball in their hands. They need a threat that changes how opponents breathe. Not just depth, not just another body, real impact. Of course, we have to keep this honest. For now, this is still speculation. There is no confirmation of talks, no proof that anything is close, and a move like this is never simple. But some rumors come out of nowhere, and others catch fire because they make sense from every angle. This feels like the second kind. It makes sense because of the physical style. It makes sense because of the need for versatility. It makes sense because of the competitive urgency. And it makes sense because a team with a franchise quarterback cannot keep asking him to carry the whole mountain by himself without a different kind of weapon around him. And there is an emotional side to this that hits hard. When a franchise gets to this stage, it gets judged not only by what it is built, but by what it is bold enough to chase. Watching opportunities pass by is a decision too. And maybe that is exactly why this possibility feels so electric. Because this would not be a cosmetic addition. This would be the kind of move that changes the temperature of the whole offense. So now I want to check the pulse of Chargers fans. If this name really started heating up for Los Angeles, would you pull the trigger without blinking? Or do you think the focus still has to stay somewhere else? But the pressure does not stop on offense. And that is where the third story cranks this whole thing up another level. Because the Chargers also cannot keep hiding from their pass rush rush need forever. Bringing Khalil Mack back helps, obviously. You keep leadership, you keep production, you keep a major tone setter in the room. But losing Olaivavega Ioane after the jump he made, then looking at the room now and seeing a lot of the same faces from last year, that sets off an alarm you just cannot ignore. Because the risk here is simple. Trusting internal growth too much when the schedule is not going to wait for anybody. Betting on a young player to break out is fine. Betting on that as your near-exclusive plan is a whole different game. And that is exactly why the idea of a reunion with Oliva Yani grabs attention, even if it does not look like a giant headline move. This is not about selling a fantasy. This is about understanding what competitive stage your team is actually in. Yani already knows the organization, knows the building, knows how this league works, and most importantly, he has still shown real production in recent years. Even at 35, he is not one of those veterans people mention just because of the name. There is recent sack production, there is rotation value, there is locker room value, and there is something that matters a lot for this team right now. A baseline level of security at a position where Los Angeles still looks way too exposed. And this ties directly into the whole thesis of this video. A title window under pressure is not just about making flashy moves. It is about not leaving obvious holes open because you wanted to be stubborn. It is about understanding that real contenders do not stare at clear weaknesses and wait for a miracle. They solve what they can solve. They protect what has to be protected. And if the offensive side of the conversation is about more support and more explosiveness, then the defensive side is about not walking into the season needing everything to break perfectly. This might not be the sexiest move of the offseason, but it might be exactly the kind of move that separates a dangerous roster from an exposed one. And then the fourth story almost works like a contrast, but it is a contrast that says everything about where the Chargers are right now. Because while one part of this conversation is about giving the offense more protection, and another part is about keeping the defense from losing its pass rush bite, here comes an asset that could actually rise in the middle of all this transition: the secondary. With major coaching changes, new coordinators, and a totally different feel being shaped on both sides of the ball, the idea of D'Angelo Pons in the second round does not feel like a random detail. It feels like fit. And that matters because changing defensive leadership is never just a nameplate swap. The language changes. The priorities change. The way the roster gets evaluated changes. And if the projection really is more zone match, more short area reaction, more aggression on the football, then a profile like Pons starts making a whole lot of sense. Even though he is smaller, he makes up for it with competitiveness, quick closing speed, and real ball production. This is not a name that pops because it sounds cool. It pops because his game actually lines up with what this new defensive picture could demand. At the same time, that is exactly where the contrast gets really interesting. Because this kind of move could strengthen a unit that already showed real opportunism, already created interceptions, already flashed the ability to flip games with takeaways. In other words, while the offense is still screaming for support and the pass rush rotation still needs attention, the defense might be finding a path to become even more aggressive in stealing possessions. Is that a good thing? Of course it is. But it also puts an uncomfortable question right on the table. What good is improving in one area if the biggest urgencies on the roster are still left wide open? This is the kind of news that can excite you and challenge you at the same time. It is exciting because there is real schematic logic, real college production, and a real fit with the new coordinator. It is challenging because it reinforces the feeling that the Chargers have to be surgical with how they spend their resources. They cannot misread what is a luxury and what is a core priority. Now I want to hear from Chargers fans. If this is how things start to unfold, do you think this kind of investment in the secondary is strengthening the team the right way? Or should every ounce of energy right now still be going into the trenches and the pass rush? At the end of the day, the picture feels pretty clear. The Chargers are in a phase where every move carries extra weight. Because the quarterback is already there, the talent is already there, the foundation to dream is already there. What comes next is turning urgency into the right decisions. Reinforce the trenches, evaluate a weapon who can transform the offense, protect the pass rush, figure out what the roster's true priority really is. That is the line between being an interesting team and being a team that can actually walk into the fight for real. A title window under pressure is exactly that, not wasting the moment when it finally shows up. So subscribe, share this with another Chargers fan, and drop your take in the comments, because this channel belongs to the people who live and breathe Chargers football.